Hello, everybody. How are you doing? So, Nintendo sabotaging itself. There's been reports that the developers have not been able to get dev Switch units for the Switch 2, and that they're actually telling the developers to develop for the Switch 1. They just raised the Switch 1 OLED price and all the other Switches. It's $400 for a Switch OLED. So for $50 more for a Switch 2, mind you, the Switch 1 is 4 gigs RAM, the Switch 2 is 12 gigs RAM, the Switch 1 is 64 gigs internal storage, the Switch 2 is 256 gigs internal storage. Has Nintendo just got to the point where they're so greedy that they want to rip off the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 customers? It's gotten to a point where the Switch 2, if you don't have third-party developer support, there's no reason to buy the Switch 2 at all. Majority of my Switch 1 games are improved on the Switch 2, but even that, you have to rely on Nintendo. So I have to rely on Nintendo to make free upgrades or, for the performance or fidelity for games on Switch 1. I know plenty of other Switch 1 games that should have that free upgrade that don't. And it doesn't look like Nintendo has added any new games for the free upgrade either. What it comes down to is the Switch 2 is primarily for main IPs from Nintendo, such as Donkey Kong Bonanza, Super Mario World, and basically Pokemon. I have a bad feeling that third-party support is not going to be on the Switch 2 for long. And it makes you wonder, maybe they want to have the developers make for the Switch 1 because then they wouldn't have to worry about the game key cards. Because the Switch 1, Nintendo had multiple different choices of cartridges that you could purchase, such as an 8 gig or a 32 gig, not just a 64 gig, unlike the Switch 2. So I don't understand. The Switch 2 is basically the Switch Pro. You shouldn't buy a Switch OLED for $400 if for $50 more you could get a Switch 2. You should buy the Switch 2. To me, it just sounds like Nintendo's being greedy. They want the money for the Switch 1 people that never had a Switch before, and then they want money from the Switch 2 that just bought the system and has hardly any games for it. I don't know. It's very interesting to me. Did you guys hear about the Switch 2 and having a read-write limitation? So you can only read-write so many times on the internal NAND. There's just so many things that about the Switch 2 that leave a bad taste in your mouth. And I thought it was funny because my kids dropped my Switch OLED so it doesn't dock anymore. And I was going to get another Switch OLED, but I ain't paying $400 for it. No way, no how. Even with the primary and secondary on the Switch 2, you could connect one primary Switch 1 to the Switch 2, and then a secondary to another Switch, and that's it. Your other switches don't work. If you want to use the Switch 1 the same time as the Switch 2, it's not possible. It does some resume play or whatever. Instead of taking the Switch 1 primary and secondary and then making Switch 2 have its own primary secondary, Nintendo was lazy and they just basically said, "Oh, the Switch 2 is in the family of Switch 1," and then that makes it so when you have two Switch 2s, primary and secondary, it makes all your other Switches not able to play the same account. So potentially, you would have to create a whole nother account on the Switch or the Switch 2 just to be able to link a primary and secondary for the Switches you already own. I just don't get it. I don't get it at all. I don't know what Nintendo's up to because, excuse me, these game key cards, they're not, their price is the same as a digital game. There's so many benefits on getting it digital, especially when these game key cards, you have to provide the storage for individual games. But when you buy the game digitally, you have to provide the storage individually for each game. At least if the game key card got broken, lost, or stolen, you'd have to rebuy it at the same exact price. But the digital eShop game you could re-download. It's a no-brainer. I really don't get it. I just don't understand. Anyone that says, "Oh, but the game key cards could be sold," yeah, it could be sold for $28 when you bought it for 50. Ain't no one gonna pay the same exact amount that you could pay for a game key card because then they just go to the store and buy the same game key card that you're selling. How does that make any sense? It doesn't make any sense at all. And the other thing is, Nintendo had these other game card cartridges sizes. They could do it for the Switch 2 too. They're just being greedy. And I know it's not just Nintendo's fault, but the whole thing is Nintendo could resolve this by just making other cartridge sizes available for the developers to develop on. I don't know. Maybe I'm just crazy. I don't own a company. I love when people say that. You don't own a company, and yet you know what's great for the company. Well, I got news for you. I'm a customer, and I can criticize the company that I bought from. These Nintendo fanboys, anytime you say anything negative about Nintendo, it's the end of the world. I can't stand fanboys for any company, to be honest. I'm an entrepreneur. I buy every system, I buy every game, I play every system, I play every game. It's as simple as that. Why would I limit myself on a great experience of playing Mario, which is Nintendo, duh, and Spider-Man, which is Sony PlayStation? You know, I'm just saying, like, no, I just don't get it. And then the craziest thing is, they say, oh, when Microsoft or Xbox or whatever you want to say bought out all those studios, that would make a monopoly. Well, I got news for you. Xbox and Sony combining together, is that not a monopoly? I don't know. It's just, it's weird how these fanboys like to form themselves into a pretzel situation to be like, oh, this is why Nintendo's doing it is great. They're saying that, oh, it's gatekeeping. The reason why Nintendo is not letting developers have the Switch 2 dev units is because they're going to dictate what games they think should be made for the Switch 2, and third party support developers, they're just going to stop. They're not going to have anything to do with the Switch 2. I'm telling you that right now. And then the main IPs such as Pokemon, Fire Emblem, who knows, maybe there'll be a Fire Emblem for Switch 2. But my point is, those are the main IPs. It's not going to be able to, let's say, keep the Switch 2 as the game system of the year or whatever. I don't know. Like, me personally, I got the Switch when it first came out, day one launch. I regret not getting the PS5 day one. The PS5 is so much more powerful than the Switch. And the games that the PS5 has, I just can't believe having the Switch, for 8 years, right? And the main thing I play on the Switch 2 is the Switch 1 games because I want better performance that it should have already had. And then Nintendo is going to pick and choose what upgrades cost money and then what upgrades are going to be free. And I don't want to hear, oh, well, if you got Nintendo Online, then, Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, whenever that comes out, is going to be no, because if you don't have a subscription, then you have to pay a fee to get that DLC. That's basically what it is, downloadable content. It's an upgrade. I mean, that's exactly what DLC is. I'm not buying Switch Enhanced Edition of games I already own on the Switch 1. So what I do is I buy the upgrade for the Kirby Forgotten Lands for 20, and then it runs exactly the same as the Switch 2 Enhanced Editions. Anyway, how do you guys feel about this? Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and like the algorithm. I get that all the time when I'm watching YouTube channels. Anyway, sorry. I'm practically new to this. My channel is, it hasn't been out that long. Anyway, thank you and God bless.